Alright, welcome everybody. Today we're looking at Crypt of the Devil Lich. Now, I gotta say, this video did not want to get made apparently because I had to wait a long ass time. I was hoping to have this out about 2 or 3 weeks ago, but it took forever for my book to arrive as well as my new equipment, so it's been quite delayed, but let's just get right into it. So today we're gonna be doing a breakdown of Crypt of the Devil Lich. I want to do more than just like an unboxing because I feel like there's enough of those already on this exact thing anyway, and unboxings aren't really my style, but this won't be a deep dive because if I ever run this and do a review, that review will probably be about like 2 hours long. That will probably be the deep dive if I ever get a chance to actually run this. But today I just want to go over the different things you can find here because I do think you might not know what you're actually getting yourself into with this. It isn't just like, oh, a 7th level dungeon that, you know, is pretty tough. There's a lot to this one. The traps and puzzles are really intense and pretty complex. The power levels you're dealing with at 7th level are nuts. It is extremely mean. I would say that this is probably the meanest dungeon I own right now. In fact, I would say this is more like a 7th level funnel more than anything else. It is so brutal. It almost in a weird way goes so far it kind of takes the edge off. I feel like because it's so mean, it turns it into more of a gamification, which is, you know, helpful considering it's a tournament arc, which is helpful considering this is a tournament game. But to give you guys the overview, I'm not going to be looking at the dev diary or the tournament rules or any of that sort of stuff. I'm going to be looking at the player handouts, the pre-gens, the bestiary, all that sort of stuff, and the dungeon itself. We'll also be looking at the VTT tokens. So I'm going to cover all that stuff first, and then we'll get to the dungeon. So if you don't care about any of that stuff, I just want to get straight to the dungeon, go to this time code, it'll be right there. I'm also going to break the video down into chapters so that you can just skip around to whatever you care about, but let's just get right into it, right? So the first thing we're looking at are the pre-gens, and so you have 3 groups of 6, all 7th level, all have insane abilities, all have a bunch of crazy magic items, so you have all that stuff covered. The first group of 6 comes with artwork, the other 2 groups don't, but you can easily just throw in your own sort of tokens or whatever else for those guys. But all you gotta know for these ones is that they'll have a little quote and some backstory, just enough to give them a little bit of character when you're running them, but not so much that you need to learn a lot or worry too much because honestly, because I don't see that many people actually surviving the entire dungeon, especially if you use the lost level, which adds way more content. So not having too much to worry about is pretty nice because they probably won't live long enough for it to matter. Just to give you guys a bit of an idea of what you're dealing with here, well, I'll just take the first one from Party 1, which is Mother Varen, and her little quote is, "Thou shalt protect those who cannot, or thou shalt die trying with honor." And then it has a little bit of backstory. Essentially what Mother Varen is, she's a cleric, but she's really a paladin. And I'm actually pretty impressed. They actually made a pretty good paladin just using the base cleric, both between the different spells and everything they have, as well as her Justicia's Fist +4 mace, which is an intelligent mace. There's a load of different crazy magic items in this game. This one's pretty cool because already being +4 is pretty great, though it does 1d3 cold damage as well, double damage to fire elementals. It also has Whirlwind Strike, which replaces a d20 action die with 2 d10 attacks, no crits possible. So that means she can choose between a 1d20 attack or 2 d10 attacks on top of her 1d16 extra action that she has at this level. Also on top of this, just to give you guys the idea of what you're dealing with, her AC is 23, her health is 70 hit points, so like you're just dealing with crazy stuff here, and I love it. And one thing too I love as well is that these characters are really well made. I would say even if you're not doing the tournament stuff, I would recommend using these. If you're doing this as part of a bigger campaign, I would absolutely say there's a high chance people are gonna die, which is totally fine. It really depends on the group. Some people don't really want that though. If you're not down with character death, I don't think you should run the same way because I feel like that takes away a lot of what makes this really interesting, which is kind of like a Tomb of Horrors level thing of just being super, super mean. So I wouldn't really recommend it unless you're doing that anyway. So if you have a main campaign that has players that have been there forever and, you know, they have characters that's been around for, you know, however long you've been playing to get to 7th level, if you guys aren't super down with them possibly dying over the dumbest bullshit, maybe don't run this. So that's what the pre-gens are good for that. Either run it with these pre-gens or run it with their campaign if you want to do that, but just keep in mind there's a good chance they're going to die. And the great thing too about these pre-gens and why I recommend running these over, you know, just a campaign one is that they are also all built with the scenario in mind. I can see they're given little boosts of things to actually help with things that are in the dungeon. So they are purpose made to get through the dungeon better than just an average normal 7th level character. Now, if you have any 7th level character, there's a good chance they'll get through it in their own ways and all sort of stuff, but there are things here to help with some of the really horrible stuff that's in here. And one thing that's kind of interesting about this first party here is that they're all lawful except for one who's neutral. And the reason for that is that the main story has a thing where you need a lawful character to actually, you know, finish the job at the end. So that's part of why it's there, which I think is interesting because usually when I play DCC, because people know I play chaotically and they're going to play chaotically, a lot of people just pick chaotic characters just on that basis alone. So I don't usually get many lawful characters. So I do think it's interesting that the first party is almost all lawful except for one guy. But that's enough time on the pre-gens. Let's get to the next stuff. So the next part we're going to cover is the Bestiary. The Bestiary has a bunch of awesome stuff in here because the dungeon itself is super diverse in what's going to throw at you. There's only really one repeat of like similar creatures. A lot of the stuff you're going to deal with are very different and very fun. I think what makes a lot of these great is a lot of the encounters with enemies also takes the environment into account. And just to give you a quick example of that, there's this one really hard one to say, Hell Wasp Swarm. That's Hell Wasp Swarm. Hellwasp Swarm. I have so much trouble saying that for some reason. But what I love about these guys is that they're basically these giant burrowing fiery wasps, which is already bad enough in itself. But I do believe the room they're in when I was reading through the book, there's a bunch of oil traps. And so if they ignite those, you basically now have to deal with fires being ignited. Players have to literally put out fires as they're fighting these things. So I do think it makes it more interesting than just going from room to room and dealing with monsters. I do think it, adds a lot to it. With that said, I do think this means that a lot of the combats you're going to have are probably going to benefit more from tokens and having, rooms drawn out a little bit, or just having more stuff like that to, help visualize things. Because I know with DCC, a lot of us tend to not do that because, once you introduce minis to a game, players will just automatically start playing in a more tactics way, which you might not want because it slows things down, or it might just change the vibe of what you guys are going for. But I do think that this, because of how much is going on and just the power levels you're dealing with, both from the players and the enemies, it might be something that's kind of inevitable. Not necessarily have to do like a full, 5e Pathfinder thing of everything is down there, but I would say you're probably going to want to at least draw circles of like, where environmentals have happened and, maybe like, oh, here's where like 3 of them are, that sort of thing. So I would keep that in mind as well. So it's the Bestiary. There's a lot more in there, but I just wanted to cover it briefly, just to give you an idea of what you're dealing with. And with the Bestiary, there's also the NPCs. It sort of fits into it because once the NPCs you're going to be dealing with here are ones you're going to fight. Crypt the Devil Lich, obviously, as well as some crazy vampire lords that are also fucking nuts. And also as well, of course, the mummified undead dragon, which you're going to deal with. So there are a lot of NPCs here, but they're basically just an extension of the Bestiary. Next, there's also a bunch of magic items you'll find here. I say a bunch, it's more like there's, a good handful of magic items. A lot of them are sentient weapons, as well as magic items. There's also some extra spells that you'll find, some new ones. And the really cool thing is that Crypt the Devil Lich can also be a patron. So if you do even just take that, even if you don't run this, but you still buy the book, you could also take that as an extra patron. She has extra cool spells. Bone Weaving, Animate Dead, and Necromantic Force are her patron spells. I do like her a lot. I could see myself using her for sure, especially if I don't get to run it. Having her still there would be kind of interesting. I feel like if you have this early on in the campaign, you could have her sow seeds for them to actually come and see her for any reason, whether you want to make them do this adventure or you want to have her in a completely different context. Perhaps she's in this one, she's still at the height of her power and not imprisoned. So depending on when it takes place for your campaign, she could be really fun for that. Lastly, before we get to the VTT stuff, we just have the player handouts, and there are player handouts in the back of the book, but there's also a player handout booklet, and they're actually colored in here. In the book, they're just black and white. And they are really nice. There's like, I believe, over 50 of them, and you have some really, really nice ones, especially early on. Just trying to show them here. Obviously, I'll have them appear on screen as I talk about them. But one thing I'll say right now is that if you see this door right here, this red door with a skull, we're going to cover what this is, and it's real mean. Not in the most brutal way kind of mean, but mean in such a middle finger to the players kind of mean. And I'm excited to get to that. But there's over about 50 of them. Some of the handouts are for the puzzles. Some of them are just to show the rooms they're in. Some of them are to show, notes and that sort of thing they might find. Covers all sorts of things. These are great to have because you're really, really going to want them with how much stuff is going to be given to the players, how much information they're going to need to keep track of. So it's very helpful for that. But with all that stuff out of the way, let's get to the VTT stuff. So you get 2 map packs. You get a GM version and a player version, which is nice. I don't necessarily know if you'd want to use the GM version other than just having like on a second screen just so you can see where the secrets are, because I think all it really does is just show you where the secrets are, which is kind of nice depending if you're not going to be using the book, because the book can be a little bit weird trying to, use that whilst using the information. So it is actually nice to have that. I don't know how many people are going to use it. One thing I noticed though, and maybe there's something I'm missing here, but I noticed this is the map for the first level, for the first dungeon. There's no squares, and I thought maybe there's a reason for that, because it's not really a big deal with Foundry, at least. I don't really use any other VTTs, so I don't really know what's like on Roll20 anymore. It's been so long since I've used that. But on Foundry, at least you can already have the grid, so this isn't really a huge deal. But the reason why I thought it was weird is that if we go over to the next one, which is level 2 here, there's a grid. I'll just zoom in a little bit just in case it's hard to see. But there's a grid there, so I don't know if that's just a fuck up where there was supposed to be a grid on the first one, because there's one on this one, there's one on the next one. I might have just missed it, but these have grids as well. But as you can see, the maps are super gorgeous. I love the color, and I'm excited to actually put these into Foundry and see how easy they are to work with. I've only worked with VTT maps made by Given Games before, which is for the Rats of Ilthmar, Lankmar game, and that one's great. But the I found the maps really nice and really easy to use. It looks like it's 150 DP, so it's really, really high resolution, honestly, for what you're going to be needing. I do think the maps could probably be a little bit higher resolution, honestly, but I don't think they're that bad. Like, I'm not It's not that, bad here. So this is the map ones. Next, here is the tokens for the main characters. Really high resolution. Obviously, you're not going to get this big when you're having it on the map, but you have one for the 6, and they are great, fully colored, and they just look awesome. So that's those ones there. I love Mother Baron. Honestly, Mother Baron might turn me on to fucking DCC clerics again. And you also have monster tokens. This is the Ghostly Shark. You got the Coin Golem. You got so many cool ones. And there's also, we'll get to this one here in a bit. This is a funny one. I like that. I like this enemy quite a bit. And there's also some NPCs here. This is Chalicia. She appears in so many different ways. Like, I have her, like, on the box art. There's the different box art. There's 3 different box arts, and then there's also a few other ways she's shown. I just think it's really funny how there's not, like, one unifying way she's seen. But yeah, and that's pretty much it for all those. All right, let's get to the good stuff now. The actual dungeon itself. So basically the way we're going to do this is because obviously I'm not going to cover every room. I'm just going to cover a little section from each area. The one I'm going to cover the most is the first area of the first level, because I think there's a lot there that once I show you that, it's a really good showing to both the players and to you if you're looking at buying this, what you're dealing with here. I haven't seen anything this bad in a while. Like, I really thought Jewels of the Carnifex was mean. Jewels of the Carnifex is Disneyland compared to this. This is nuts. So I cover the first level. In the first area, the players are at the mouth of the cave. They see a bunch of dead adventurers already there. The immediate mouth of the cave has been trapped with these sort of, like, spike stones. The stone floor between the stalagmites has been covered in enspelled stones to create a trap. So right away, you're already dealing with the trap that does 44 damage per 5 feet moved. Okay. Now, this is a quick way just to get around it. You can, fly over it. You can go around the side. A lot of different things I'm sure they could do. They could probably try and disable the traps. So there is that, but it does show like, oh yeah, right away, we're getting right into it. And immediately after that, they come across a vampire who they don't know is a vampire yet, who has been corrupted completely by Chalicia the Devil Lich. And what he's going to do is he's going to be muttering some mad things, but he's going to be sort of baiting the players closer towards what look like 4 vampire spawn that are on the ceiling that they can't see. He's also going to be bringing them closer to these big braziers that are burning behind him. And what they'll do is they'll stop them from being able to be turned, like from the turn unholy of the cleric. So it's a pretty rough encounter. So it's a very fun dynamic fight between, Brother Mikolas, the vampire, who's, a really, really good fighter because he's a fucking vampire. You have the braziers stopping them from being able to be turned, and then you also have the surprise vampire spawn from the ceiling. So you just have a bunch of really, really fun stuff there. And once that's defeated, what they see now is they're just like in this big sort of cavernous tunnel. The actual entrance to the crypt is hidden on this mosaic with this Grim Reaper. There's a whole scythe trap that they'll either trigger or find and, stop that, and then they can actually go to the real crypt. But what they'll probably see first, and this is why it's so mean, I mentioned earlier, remember that door I mentioned earlier? Because it obviously looks like the entrance to an evil dungeon. But every time to open that is going to lead to sort of magical backlash. So if you use knock, magical backlash, try and do anything, just all this backlash where it's just going to keep hurting you. And it hurts like in AoE. It's not just like the person doing it. You're going to want to back off because it's going to hit you hard. And the only way to open up is to get a high enough spell check from a cleric, which I think is like 24 plus. Which is, pretty high. And you firstly still get the magical backlash. So even though you succeed, you still get hurt for it. And then when the doors open, they are just met by a stone slab, and scribbled in it, it says, "Careful whom you trust." Which is just like, that is so mean. And that is a fantastic opening to what to expect from this fucking dungeon. But we're not done yet, because the actual first room of the crypt, like inside the crypt, is ridiculous. And I do think this dungeon showed me this will be my ceiling in terms of like complex puzzle traps and that sort of stuff, because a lot of that stuff can be a little bit much. Thankfully, this book gives you handouts. They give you the maps that are really nice. They give you a bunch of things. Like in the book, they give you as much description as possible. But before I even get to the room itself, to give you an idea of what you're dealing with here in terms of detail, this room covers 3 pages. Now, it isn't a full 3 pages. There is a big art piece and everything else, but still, compared to how long most rooms are in DCC games, which are usually like 2 paragraphs or so, that shows you how much you're dealing with. They walk into this room, and it's a circular room. There are both 2 shades in there, sort of just going around. There's some random stuff on the ground, like a sword and some bodies. The bodies belong to the two shades they're trying to, get out. They can also step on some pressure plates, which causes the room to spin without them knowing, because the room's spinning, but they can't tell until they open one of the doors. And on top of that, there's also a gas trap that they can set off just to shoot down poison gas onto them if they hit a certain pressure plate. So you're seeing all the different things you're dealing with. And there's loads of doors in this room. I should actually check here to make sure I get this right. But there are 8 different ones. So including the room they came in, there are 8 different doors or entryways, and they won't know which one to go through until they open it up and see like the room spinning as they see the doors fly by. So yeah, that covers the first basically 2 rooms of this dungeon. It's a lot. It's a lot. So just keep that in mind. This is the sort of stuff I want to cover because a lot of people will be like, oh, cool, it's a big dungeon. There's a lich there and it'll be a lot of fun stuff. Just finding stuff. It's like, yeah, it looks like a lot of fun and other things. But this, if you do want to run it the way it wants to be run, is going to take a lot of prep work. Now, like you saw with the VTT stuff, there is a lot of stuff they're covering for you. So you have a lot of that. If you do the prep, you can actually cover this pretty easily without too much trouble. But if you're not doing that, if you run DCC the way I think most people run DCC, I don't know how wieldy this will be. Next, we're going to do the lost level, which comes in its own booklet. This is actually really big. The booklet is thick. Like this booklet is, let's see how many pages it is. Okay. Yeah. So it's in total about 34 pages. And 34 pages for a booklet like this for DCC, this is a whole scenario by itself. So it shows you how much is in here. But I'm not going to cover a lot of it. The reason why I'm covering the lost level now and not later is that the lost level says you should cover it between levels 1 and 2. You can do it between 2 and 3, but it says it's better if you do 1 and 2. So I just thought I'd do it now, and then we'll get to level 2 afterwards. All right, so the area I'm going to cover is actually just a fraction of an area. We're looking at the Dark Garden, which is room 8. And the reason why I'm only covering this one little aspect of it is because this room literally goes from room 8A to 8E. Like, it's 5 different sections. And this is just one room of several in here. And the reason why I want to cover this one is because I think it's just a classic one, and I felt like they did a good job in having a classic drow creature, but in a sort of nice remixed way. And that is Area 8D, the gazebo. And what's here, essentially, is a stone spider golem. And here's the art for it. And I just thought it was fun because spiders and drow, they go together really, really well. But just having a giant spider in a level 7 adventure, like, is pretty, unless you're doing something really, really fun with it, like either like a bunch of them or they're in a certain way where it's like, highly intelligent, whatever it might be. It is pretty, generic at this point. It's pretty overused. I mean, I do think giant spiders kind of never got style, but at the same time, I do think if you're gonna be doing something so special, you should do something extra special for, those old tropes. And I think doing it in the style of a stone spider golem, which honestly is pretty rough. It has 250 hit points. Its AC is only 17, funnily enough. For a stone spider, you'd think it'd be a little bit higher, but I think that's totally fine. It has blind sight, it can shoot out flame, it has paralysis rays. It's no joke. It isn't just a giant spider that's also stone. Like, they went all out with it. So I just want to highlight that one from this area. There's a load of other areas here, but honestly, with how deadly this is already with the 3 levels you are given, the lost level, I could see being almost like its own offshoot if you want to do that. If you're like, oh, man, it's going to kill these guys. Maybe we should do like a sort of side adventure with different adventures in a different era or time, or at the same time, and just go through this one area and see how it goes. And maybe you can use them as backups later or something like that. You could also just put it in there and see how it goes. I do think this will extend anything you're doing by several sessions, which is totally fine. I just wanted to keep in mind that you add this and it does add way more deadliness. It might ruin the pacing a little bit depending on how snappy you're trying to be. So just keep that stuff in mind. So next we're looking at the second level, and for this one, I just wanted to look at the Elevator of Doom. Just in case you're thinking that level 1 trap will be like, yeah, it's kind of a 1 done. The Elevator of Doom is another example of just a crazy room you're going to deal with, and there are several. The dungeon itself only has so many rooms per level, which I think works, but it's a bit misleading because you're like, oh, there's only like 8 rooms in this level. It's not that big. And then you see how complex each room is, or how deadly it might be, or all the things you have to consider, from players needing time to figure out puzzles or riddles, or the combat really extending because of how difficult they are, how many powers your players have. Like, there is a lot of stuff here where I think it's very hard to tell how long this would actually take for me. I know it's a tournament game, and so people have been able to do it like a level a day or whatever it was. I don't know how long those days were. Were they 12-hour days? Were they 4-hour days? 6-hour days? So were they playing with the most expedient way in mind? There's a lot of things I don't know with this, so it is anybody's guess, except for the ones who've actually played it, how long this will take your group, But the reason why I wanted to pick the Elevator of Doom, other than its really awesome name, is that this just shows you how mean this dungeon can be just throughout the entire time. There is no break. There's no giving the players a goddamn chance. It is constantly just ball busting. And just to give you the sort of quick breakdown of this one. It's a whole room, a giant 60 by 60 foot square room that goes down when they're on it. And not only does it go down into water. There's holes at the bottom, so there's spikes that come up. So the bottom becomes terrible. The players have to deal with drowning rules now as well because they're underwater, and they also probably have a bunch of like heavy armor and that sort of stuff, so all of them might not be doing too well without some spells or some really good strength or agility rules. But it doesn't end there too, because you also have to deal with two giant ghost sharks who swim around in the water and will also perhaps leave this area if they feel like it and want to go after the players if it's been a little bit too easy on them. So yeah, you got spikes in the floor that will come up as the elevator goes down because there's holes that allow them to go through. You have drowning rules. You have general fighting. You have ghost sharks. It's a fun time. It's a really, really fun time. And that's just the one I wanted to highlight from level 2. Let's just get on to level 3 now. All right, so level 3, we're going to do a bit of a lightning round here with a few different things just because I think they're pretty fun. And this is, again, only scratching the surface of a lot of stuff that's in here. But in a bit of a note of reprieve, though could also end in a fight depending on how it's played, how you want to play it, or how the players interact with it, because at this point they might just hit everything that moves once they see it. There is a sentient chalkboard named Slate, which is a great name for a chalkboard. And I just thought it was really fun because this chalkboard is super knowledgeable and can help give them loads of information. Except there's two things. Firstly, it hasn't seen Lich in a while, so it's also an insecure chalkboard, which just seems like a really, really fun thing to RP. I don't know, something about an insecure chalkboard just being like, nobody loves me anymore, and just being super depressed is just really funny to me. The second thing is this part, which I just think is a really fun little bit of writing, and that is, Slate is a near endless font of knowledge regarding the Devil Lich, but is not entirely honest, outright lying at times to make things interesting. If confronted, it states it is cursed to always tell a mistruth. This, of course, is a lie. You essentially have, like, a really, like, I don't know, like a gossipy high school girl in the body of a chalkboard. I'm not really sure how you'd want to play it, but I feel like there's a lot of different ways you could do it. And I think the best way to do it would be to play it both helpful in many ways, and then also really, really not helpful at all. So maybe do 2 truths and a lie kind of thing, where you give them 2 truths and then one like either really cryptic answer or one straight out lie. So you can still help the players out with some information you really want to make sure they do get, and then also be like, well, I don't want to make this too easy here. Let's throw out a little curveball about, you know, what she's weak to, or about what's around the corner, or any sort of thing that would make things interesting for them. So I think that's really fun. And the next one we're going to cover, of course, is the big fucking dragon. I'll probably pop the picture up on screen just so you can see it better, but this full page look of it is awesome. I absolutely love the framing and everything. It's so great. And the great thing about this one with this big ass dragon is that not only do you get to fight a lich in a game, you get to fight a dragon too, and an undead mummified dragon at that. But going back to the thing I said earlier about environmentals is that his whole lair is just a giant room filled with bones. I think it's like knee deep. So the players are going to be doing checks and that sort of thing, dealing with having to wade through. So you're going to have to use up spells, you know, either to fly or do things, or just do some pretty crazy stuff just to stay alive, as they're both fighting the environment and an actual dragon, as well as dealing with other things that are lying in wait in all these bones. So there's a lot of crazy stuff here, and again, just brutally mean as always. So up until this point, I haven't really covered the plot at all, because I don't think it matters that much. It's pretty standard stuff, you know, evil lich and all that sort of thing. But what they have been doing throughout this entire dungeon is collecting pieces of a sword that they think they need to slay her with, but it's also, again, a mean trick, because nothing can be nice in this whole goddamn dungeon. And that sword they think is actually a sentient sword that they need to kill her is actually the phylactery and basically, like, I guess, servant slash best friend of the lich. And it will act like a lawful, stupid character, or at least that's how I would play it. It basically will constantly talk about how it wants to kill her. Its name is True Death, but its real name is Bane. That's what the original sword's called, but some stuff got mixed up with it being called True Death. Again, won't get into that stuff too much. It doesn't really matter for this. But all you need to know is that the players are essentially the reason why the Devil Lich is actually going to escape out of here. The players are probably going to be told that they need to stop the Lich before she breaks out, without realizing that they are actually the ones who are going to break her out, because she needs that sword from a lawful character, I think, to basically get out of here and do whatever they're doing, and she's going to fight them, all sort of stuff. So this whole thing that's going on here is just a huge mean trick, and the players are responsible for all of this that's going to happen next. So they will meet a smith at the end of this area in level 3, put the pieces together, get him to smelt it. There's a little bit of a moral conundrum with a fire elemental that's sort of enslaved, but there's also this ghostly dwarf that's a smith. It's a whole thing. Again, does not matter for what we're talking about right now, but there's a whole thing with that. He will put the sword back together, or one of the players who's good at smithing will put it back together if they don't have him, or, you know, kill him or whatever they might do. And then they'll go to the final sort of encounter. They'll deal with her. There'll be that whole huge betrayal. And that's why I think you should definitely play the sword as lawful stupid as possible. Really make it go like, no, stop this. We must go fight the Devil Lich. Yeah, and maybe use it in a way that would, you know, push the story forward. Don't stop players from doing stuff they want to do. That's never really fun. But it would be an extra fun voice to throw in to be like, you're wasting time. We need to kill her. Really convince the players this thing's entire purpose in life is to kill her. And I think they will believe it. And I think it will really make that betrayal cut even deeper. I think if you half-ass it, the players will kind of be like, oh, right, the sword talks. I forgot. Yeah. Oh, what? This is a crazy thing that's happened. I can't believe it. But I think if you really try and make the sword a character and a really boisterous, even obnoxious one, they don't have to like it or anything. But if they truly believe it to be something else and then turn it, that's how you get them. And I think you'll have a fantastic reaction at your table if you do that to them. But I won't get into the whole final encounter too much. Essentially, there's two parts to it where she first meets up with them, fights them, sort of peel them back to her fort, and there's a whole thing with that. And they'll hopefully defeat her if they made it this far, that is. Like, as you've seen from just a few rooms, and there's several other ones there, this is really, really mean. But yeah, they do all that, beat her, save the day, finally put her down for good, and then that'll be the end. And that's the Crypt of the Devil Lich. But I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope this was helpful. I hope if you were looking at buying this, this has either made you realize, oh, I really do want this, or made you go, oh, that's not what I thought it was. This is actually a lot more intense than I thought it was, and I don't think this is actually gonna be for me, which I think is a totally valid response. I do think this is really pushing it for me even. I think anything crazier than this, and I would probably be like, nah, I'm good. But it does help how many tools they've given you to help you with. Loads of description, loads of handouts and VTT tokens, and all sorts of stuff to really help make sure that this runs as smoothly as possible. I really do think you're going to need to do a lot of prep for this. I don't think you can wing this one. I mean, maybe you can, and you know, just condense things or cut things out. If you want to run it as is, I do think you're going to do a decent amount of prep for it. But yeah. That's Crypt of the Devil Lich. It's really cool. I'm excited to run it someday. I hope you guys found this helpful. Just give you guys some extra updates here. I finally started a Patreon. Right now, there's just one tier because I don't want to go too crazy with stuff, but basically just gives you, you know, a nice Discord role, gets videos a day early, a few other things, some video poll votes, that sort of stuff. Nothing too crazy. It's more just, hey, do you want to support me? Here you go. Here's a way to do so. There's also the Discord, as I mentioned before. I have a second channel where I do gaming stuff, where I usually just cut down streams, just upload them there. So if you like that sort of stuff, it's pretty good. I did do a long drive video with my buddy. I do actually recommend that. There's some other videos there where I'm like, this is just me sort of testing out editing. But the latest video I put up there was genuinely funny, and I do think a lot of people would actually quite like it.
Turn the lights on. It's a nice bloom going.
It to be aimed right at the. There you go. Oh no, I might have fucked us here. Uh-oh.
What?
I just realized this jerry can was full of water, not gas, and I put
Oh no! Oh, the car is gonna be so fucked.
Oh no! Oops. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys have a good one, and stay safe out there.